Here at jmplumley.com is an article by J.M. Plumley entitled The Big Bad Wood, Nahanni Valley. And Mr. Plumley begins. Yes, it is true. I, too, have seen the video about the mysterious and frightening expanse of the Nahanni Valley. And I, too, am obsessed with it. I wanted to dig deeper. If you are into human folly, eerie deaths, forbidden forests, and unsolved mysteries, this is for you. The Nahanni National Park Reserve is a 12,000 square mile stretch of mountains, forests, geysers, and grizzly bears, way up in the northwestern part of Canada. Think closer to Alaska than to Vancouver. Its centerpiece is the Nahanni River. The river is no ordinary river. It's one of the few on Earth that is so powerful that mountains and cliffs grow up around it, rather than it being formed around them. After washing through 11-story high canyons, it dumps into a waterfall twice as tall as Niagara Falls. It's hard to deny that the valley is breathtaking, but that beauty is something few people experience. The park is extremely remote. 311 miles from the nearest city of Yellowknife, which is also the only city in the Northwest Territories, with a population of under 20,000. The only way to get inside is by way of multi-day hike, boat trip, or plane. That might look simple on paper, but in practice it's not. From the moment you get there, the Nahanni Valley shows its personality. Overland treks are arduous, and the landscape is frequently impassable. Boats have difficulty getting into certain parts of the valley without capsizing. The river has been known to abruptly change shape, baffling even longtime guides to the area. And planes have an unexplained tendency to smash into the mountaintops, earning the peaks the nickname Funeral Range. Because of these difficulties, and the stories we're about to get into, the Nahanni National Park is not only uninhabited, but still largely untouched. History only tells us of a tribe that used to live there, the Neha. We only know about the Neha via the Dene, who have occupied the Northwest Territories for 10,000 years. They and the Neha were not exactly friends. Dene history holds that the Neha were erratic and violent, storming down out of the mountains to raid Dene villages and decapitate people. At last the Dene got fed up and made a plan for retribution. After much preparation, they snuck into the Nahanni Valley to surround the Neha camp. Though no one was on watch, the campfires were still burning. Food steamed in bowls. The Neha must still be in their teepees. At the signal, the Dene threw open the teepee flaps, ready to attack, only to find the tents empty. The whole camp was empty. The entire tribe had disappeared. With a sudden premonition of doom, the Dene hightailed it out of there, and no Neha was ever seen again. Perhaps it's because of this episode that the Dene are said to avoid the Nahanni Valley. They maintain that there is something bad in those woods. Specifically, they say there's something bad along a certain 200-mile stretch, 200 miles, of the river, where canyon walls swallow the shoreline and blot out the sun. There, caves dot the rock like pupils, their shadows hiding whatever might be looking out. Of course, why heed the warnings of people that have known the valley for millennia? People heard there was gold. We all know how well the Klondike Gold Rush went. From 1896 to 99, 100,000 people set out for the Yukon, chasing tales of riches. The trip was so brutal that only 30,000 made it. That's 3 out of 10. And those that did found that there was scant gold to be had. Only mud, mosquitoes, and disease. foolhardily as those who attempted the Klondike trip were. Few were so foolhardy as to attempt to get there through the Nahanni Valley, but some did. And when it became clear that there wasn't a lot of gold in the Yukon, a few dared to look there. People, it turns out, never learned their lesson. Mr. Plumley continues. The two most infamous Nahanni Valley gold seekers were brothers Willie and Frank McLeod. After a tip from a mysterious man named Little Nahanni, who flashed them a watch and chain supposedly made of Nahanni gold, the McLeods ignored the warnings about how dangerous the valley was and went there to seek their fortune. They scanned the river for weeks, finding nothing. Maybe the tales were exaggerated. Maybe there was no gold at all. Finally, after passing through that long, towering expanse of canyons, the black caves looking silently down, the brothers spotted something glittering along the shoreline. It was gold. There were fat nuggets of it. Thousands of them. Gold ribboned in the rock. It was unlike anything the brothers had ever seen. It was as if it had appeared by magic. Thank you, Coral G, for being a producer for 15 months. Happy anniversary, Coral. Ecstatic, Willie and Frank pulled ashore. Sifting quickly, they packed their boat to the brim. This was it. They were rich. They turned their boat around, eager to get home and get spending. But just as they were leaving, the rapids picked up. After weeks of managing the river successfully, it suddenly proved too much. Their boat smashed against the rocks, and water rushed in, washing away their possessions. They lost not only the gold, but also their survival gear. Hungry and half-drowned, the brothers faced a decision. Continue with what scant gear they had left, or go home and regroup. It was an agonizing choice. At last they decided to go home. But the episode did not dampen their enthusiasm. Instead, it made them more obsessed with the valley than ever. They begged their brother Charlie to come back with them. If he did, they could all be rich. Rich beyond imagining. Wary of the difficulties of the valley and their fanaticism, Charlie declined. Undaunted, Willie and Frank gathered new gear, hitched their packs, and in 1906 went back into the woods without Charles. On their second expedition, 1 year had passed. Charlie assumed that Willie and Frank had hit the jackpot, and that they were working hard to make the most of it, and that they'd be home soon. 2 years passed. Maybe Willie and Frank had run into trouble. Charlie worried over all the perils of the Nahanni Valley that had made him hesitate in the first place. The crevices, the sinkholes, the animals that could tear you to bits. Finally, he sent out a search party. Set out with a search party. After a long stretch of nothing, the team spotted a camp in some spruce trees along the left bank of the Nahanni, not far from the second canyon. Nahanni has 4 canyons. Charlie rushed ashore. The camp was empty, but there was a message written on a broken dog sled. We have found a fine prospect. If they had, Charlie didn't know where it was. The shore and rocks were devoid of gold. There was nothing of the ribbons and nuggets about which his brothers had raved. Charlie and his men fanned out, hoping to find some clue as to where Willie and Frank had gone. Then someone called out, and it wasn't Frank or Willie. There were 2 corpses. In some versions of the story, they were tied to a tree. In others, one was on the ground, and the other was half in its tent, reaching toward a weapon to which it never got. Both men had been decapitated. The heads were nowhere to be found.